Hi, what's this? There isn't even a sofa here. Oh well. Hi, I'm Bill, and I'm British, but I don't go on about it. And unlike a lot of Brits my age, I grew up with Nintendo. And with a fair bit of research through a number of different languages and a little bit of my own memories, I think I can tell you a little bit about how that happened. This is the story of the long, winding road Nintendo took to get from Japan to Europe. Nintendo histories that provide a broad overview or focus on specifically Japan or America are everywhere. But this is a tale seldom told. But as is often the case with video games, they went from Japan to Europe via America. So if you've read David Sheff's Game Over and don't fancy a little bit of a recap, by all means skip ahead a little. Japan, 1979. After already making waves in Japanese arcades with its laser rifle system, a toy company called Nintendo releases its first arcade video games, Space Fever, Sheriff and Monkey Magic, followed by Space Firebird, Hellfire and Radarscope in 1980. It was the right time too. This was the beginning of the golden age of arcades, and Nintendo saw immediate success in their home country. Ever ambitious, Nintendo's president Hiroshi Yamauchi almost immediately looked to expand his new video game empire to the most lucrative arcade market in the world. This is the story of Nintendo of America. Founded initially to break into the $8 billion a year US coin-op market. Nintendo had sold their products abroad before. The earliest I could find was Gunpei Yokoi's Ultra Hand from 1966. He's the Australian version, with alternate box art showing the Ultra Hand grabbing a joey from a kangaroo. And it's entirely possible the Hanafuda card business did some exports before then. But Nintendo didn't become a truly international company until Nintendo big boss Hiroshi Yamauchi's daughter and her husband first arrived in New York. They were the founders of Nintendo of America, Yoku and Minoru Arakawa. The Arakawas are an aristocratic Kyoto family, and the Yamauchis are very successful in business, so between them they own about a fifth of Kyoto. But a young Minoru Arakawa was keen to make a life for himself rather than simply rely on his heritage. And to do that, he had to start somewhere where he wasn't an aristocrat. I found out one of the roosters, there's two roosters, one of the roosters is called Zelensky, and President is very loud today, I think. He went to the United States, journeyed across the country in an old bus, and then got himself a degree in civil engineering from MIT. He got his second master's degree in 1972, then was tempted back to Japan by stories from Japanese businessmen, talking about how their massively successful businesses were raking in cash by trading all over the world. So he got a job in Vancouver, working for a Japanese real estate developer. He met Hiroshi Yamauchi's daughter, Yoko, on a visit back to Japan at a society ball. Her father was fully devoted to Nintendo. He always brought his ambitions to work and then his frustrations back home. And he was away a lot, but nonetheless very strict with his daughter. Honk. Honk, honk, honk. Honk, honk, honk.
Eventually.
So their relationship was not good, and she longed to meet a man who had nothing at all to do with her father. Minoru Arakawa was such a man, so they got married and moved to Vancouver. Then in 1979, Hiroshi Yamauchi sets out to convince his son-in-law to become president of a new company, Nintendo of America. Yamauchi always wanted to expand into America, and this guy, having travelled all over the place and gotten a good education from there, seemed like a really good fit, plus marrying his daughter. But Yoko wasn't so enthusiastic. She feared if Minoru and Hiroshi became close working together, then her husband would become just like her father. But she agrees to see how it goes, probably largely due to her father's promise that Nintendo of America would be its own entity, completely separate from Nintendo in Japan. It would of course receive initial backing from Nintendo, but its success or failure would be down to the Arakawas. Before the founding of Nintendo of America, some Americans were getting to play Nintendo's games through a distributor called Far East Video in Seattle. They'd done well importing and distributing Space Fever and Sheriff. Meanwhile in Europe, Sheriff was being distributed by a little company called Sega. Weird how that worked out. Anyway, Al Stone and Ron Judy became the first sales department for Nintendo of America, but keep their independence as Far East Video. The deal was presented as risk-free, with Nintendo covering their expenses, but they basically could keep doing the same deals they were doing already, just paying Nintendo a set fee per machine sold. They want the contract looked over, so they take it to an attorney by the name of Howard Lincoln. Some of you will know that name. But he helps them to fix it up, and then off they go to work for the Arakawas. Howard Lincoln, a bit later, would be Nintendo's legal counsel, vice president, and then chairman, but his story's not for this video. At the end of their first year, Nintendo of America is just about surviving. Sales have dipped a bit and they needed a hit. Radarscope was doing pretty well in their test market in Seattle. Could that be the hit they needed? Minoru Arakawa thought so, and bet nearly all of Nintendo of America's money, ordering 3,000 of them. American viewers, you must remember playing Radarscope in the arcades, right? 3,000 cabinets as an initial order? It must have been massive! No? Quite right, it didn't go as planned. The games took 4 months to ship, and by this time the hype had run out and they only managed to shift about 1,000 of them. Almost all of the value of Nintendo of America was sitting in a warehouse in these 2,000 unsold arcade cabinets. So that's the story of Nintendo of America, a little company that tried, and failed, to bring Nintendo games into America, but was never heard from again. Nearly. It occurred to Minoru Arakawa that if they repainted the radarscope cabinets and put a new game in there, then they might be able to shift them. Nintendo of America moves to Seattle, where Japan is just 9 days by boat. Between this and ordering new circuit boards rather than full cabinets, they could put their new game out much more quickly. So he told Hiroshi Yamauchi they need a new game. But Yamauchi didn't have any of his top engineers and programmers to devote to a new project for America. They were all busy with stuff for Japan, and Nintendo of America was, at this point, a very small part of Nintendo's business. Remember, Yamauchi was a businessman first, and a family man, I mean, not even second really, but somewhere quite far down the list after business. If Nintendo of America failed, then of course he'd be disappointed, but at this point in Nintendo's history it was the right business choice to let them. So he just found this apprentice who'd been doing some artwork for their previous games and set him to task to come up with a game for America. Unfortunately, the young Shigeru Miyamoto turned out to be pretty good at game design. He didn't know a great deal about the US though. He called his game Donkey Kong because he thought it meant stubborn big ape, or at least it would to an American audience. It didn't. Al Stone and Ron Judy saw the name, tried the game, and thought it was worse than Radarscope. Arakawa complained to Yamauchi, but Yamauchi told him it's a good game, and to get on with trying to sell it. They sold their 2,000 cabinets and thousands more on top. And when Donkey Kong cereal started flying off the shelves, Nintendo had well and truly arrived.
Now, on your breakfast table, Donkey Kong brand cereal.
Crunchy berries are fun for breakfast. Donkey Kong cereal.
The sweet, crunchy corn taste will drive you ape.
You love the crunch. Donkey Kong cereal. Crunchy berries are fun for breakfast.
It's part of this complete breakfast.
Donkey Kong cereal. You love the crunch.
They had some legal wrangling with Universal Studios to sort out, but finally Nintendo had become a success in America. It would be reasonable to think they'd take their next steps into Europe, but Nintendo of Europe wasn't founded until 1990. So what happened up until then? How did Europeans get to play Donkey Kong? Well, here's where it gets a little crazy. The popularity of Donkey Kong meant a lot of bootleg machines finding their way into arcades across the USA, and for a while part of Howard Lincoln's job was to stop them. This is Crazy Kong. Hear that? This is the first game where Mario speaks. Kind of. The colours are all messed up. And then there's also this version that says Part 2 on the title screen, where the colours are less messed up, and there are some little gameplay changes. They didn't fix this bug that lets me finish the first level in a few seconds. This bug was in the first Japanese release of Donkey Kong, along with the text "How high can you try?" rather than "How high can you get?" Nintendo fixed both of these pretty quickly, but they survived into Crazy Kong Part 2. Although credit to Falcon for this cool little intro animation. Look! Crazy Kong is escaping from the cage Falcon made for him. This one also says the company's name on the title screen, unlike the first one. Rare for a bootleg, no? Well, it's not a bootleg. Sort of. Nintendo couldn't keep up with the US demand for Donkey Kong cabinets themselves, so they gave Falcon a license to sell their Crazy Kong in non-US markets. Not just in Japan, but also in Europe. The agreement sort of fell apart when Crazy Kong started turning up in the US. Nintendo sued Falcon and won. But Falcon wasn't going to take this lying down. Oh no. They had a God-given right to do whatever they wanted with Nintendo's properties that could not be challenged by any court. Or something like that. Anyway, they bootlegged Donkey Kong Jr., and the president of Falcon became the first person ever to be arrested for copying a video game. Their actions as a company and the weird colours and the other oddities with Crazy Kong made me think it was always intended to be a bootleg. But at the last minute, they asked a Nintendo who was too busy making Donkey Kong cabinets to deal with it if they could distribute it legitimately, and Nintendo said, yeah, alright, crack on, but stay out of the US. And they didn't. This is Logger. As a lumberjack, you have to jump over logs to reach a giant bird that stole your axe. I'm sure any relation to any other game is purely coincidental. This was developed by English company Century Electronics for their CVS, or convertible video system, in 1982. These were popular in British amusement arcades. Shipping full cabinets to our tiny little island was a pain, so there were multiple manufacturers designing generic arcade machine hardware with swappable program modules. There was also a convenient level of uncertainty in 1980s Britain. around where the software could be copyrighted. Throughout 1981 and 82, Atari and Sega diligently pursued copiers in courts all over Europe. One such case involved John Richards, of appropriately named British company Trollfame. Trollfame was more brazen than most arcade bootleggers, advertising their wares in the British arcade press. Sega sued Richards for copying Frogger, and, cocky as ever, Richards said this in an interview leading up to the court case in August of 1982.
The computer program that runs the game is machine generated from the very beginning. Somebody has the idea, types some instructions into a computer, and then the computer does lots of work and produces the end program. We contend that, because it is a computer-generated display, a graphics display, it does not fall within the fact. The third point they're claiming is the actual design of the little characters that are displayed on the screen. A reproduction of an original drawing that somebody has done in the very early design stages, and I believe that the computer transformation of that picture onto the screen does not fall within the Copyright Act.
He knew. He later admitted that his interpretation of the 1956 Copyright Act wouldn't fly. He was just buying some more time for his company to sell some more bootleg games. And hey, may as well try it on, right? I mean, at this point, he didn't really have much to lose. But this was one of the earliest test cases for video game copyrights, and of course the judge ruled with Sega. After this, Sega and other developers started going after arcade operators, and they became a lot more wary about purchasing pirated games. But up until that point, with the proliferation of swappable PCBs and no proven copyright, Donkey Kong got everywhere in some form. Of course, some legitimate cabinets and PCBs also made it onto British shores and into other European countries. Following the 1979 success of Space Invaders, companies would compete vociferously for contracts to bring Japanese games to Europe. How vociferously? Well, in 1980, Game World Group became the only company in Britain with a stock of Nintendo's Space Firebird after Freddie Bailey held a party in his hotel room at a trade convention, getting all the other distributors blind drunk so they'd be hungover for the negotiations. But by Donkey Kong's release in 1981, companies were getting a bit fed up with the cutthroat competition for exclusive licenses when it was never clear which of the huge number of Japanese arcade games would be successful. Many of them deemed it to be a much riskier business than trading in clones, while they could still be willfully naive about the legal side. In 1982, Nintendo would start to focus more deliberately on the European market. Al Stone left Nintendo of America and Far East Video to become head of Outcore International in France to distribute Nintendo's games in Europe. Also in 1982, sales of Donkey Kong started to slow and Nintendo ceased production. I find the timing of Donkey Kong really interesting. Donkey Kong was released in 1981, and then in 1982 the arcade market drastically changed. Not just in Europe, but worldwide, with the explosion of available games causing the market to become saturated. The golden age of arcades was coming to an end, and had Donkey Kong released a year later, it could have been a complete flop. Maybe nobody would have picked it up. Still, Nintendo probably made a smart decision to stop production so as not to harm the resale value of their game while they worked on the follow-up Donkey Kong Jr., which came out in August of 1982. Nintendo finally embraced arcade conversion kits, already popular in the bootleg market, when they released Mario Bros. In 1983. No need to ship a load of massive cabinets from Japan when arcade operators had plenty of Donkey Kong Jr. and Popeye machines ripe for conversion. Outcore International would be responsible for distributing Nintendo's arcade cabinets throughout Europe up until 1987, when Al Stone returned to Nintendo to become head of their international coin-op sales division. But they didn't have anything to do with home computers and consoles, since up until 1985, with the release of the Nintendo Entertainment System in North America, Nintendo didn't have a console for international markets. Ports of Donkey Kong people could play at home were handled by other companies under license. Nintendo gave Coleco exclusive rights to create console ports of Donkey Kong, with the home computer rights going to Atari. This meant while Atari Soft branded ports went out to home computers, Atari's own 2600 console had a port by Coleco. But this is neither. This is the ZX Spectrum port of Donkey Kong from British company Ocean Software, who also did a version for the Commodore 64 after Atari had released theirs. But didn't Atari have exclusive rights? Sure, in the USA, but in Europe it was Ocean who leveraged their existing relationships with Japanese video game developers to get a meeting with Nintendo and a license to make their home computer ports for European markets. And I have to say, out of all the home Donkey Kong ports I played for this video, the Commodore 64 port by Ocean is by far the best one. Here's Mario Bros. On the ZX Spectrum. Ocean got the rights to that too, as well as Donkey Kong Jr. It looks okay, but they made it control like Mario's riding in a shopping trolley. They asked about getting Super Mario Bros., but didn't get it, for reasons which would very soon become obvious. Before that though, let's talk Game & Watch.
Game Watch, Game Watch, Game Watch, Game Watch. It's a demo Game Watch, don't a demo Game Watch, dale demo Game Watch, Game Watch.
ジャッジ、ボール、バーミン、ファイヤー、マイクロコンピューターを使ったゲームウォッチ。ゲームをしないときはデジタル式クォーツ時計です。ゲームウォッチ。
The story of how these found their way into Scandinavia is also the story of Nintendo Denmark, Sweden, Norway and Finland. In 1981, a Swedish man called Ove Bergström was in Singapore looking for cool electronics to import, and he came across the Nintendo Game & Watch Fire RC04. He was hooked. He searched out a contact for Nintendo, then he sent a telex saying that he'd want to be the Swedish distributor. He told a little lie about the size of his company. His company, Bergsala, was a small electronics retailer, but he assured Nintendo he could be the distributor for all of Sweden. So he visited Japan, managed to wrangle the distribution rights, and through sheer force of balls made a success of it. By 1983, he'd sold 1.7 million Game & Watches, but at that point sales started to dwindle, so he went out to Japan to look for the next big thing, and he came back with a Famicom. He begged Nintendo to let him sell it, but the video games crash in America meant that Nintendo couldn't be confident of the success of a home video games console overseas. But he kept badgering them, and eventually they relented and said they'd release a special version of the Famicom just for Sweden, even though they hadn't really seen any interest from the rest of Europe at this point. Nintendo would change their minds about a European Famicom after the release of the NES in North America, and they decided Europe could have that instead. Despite being a modest electronics retailer sending lies to Japan by telex, Bergsala would give Nintendo its first great European success story and become the sole distributor for Nintendo products in Scandinavia. For more detail on that story, including how he invented Club Nintendo, check out the link to IGN in the description. I've deliberately skipped over a load of details because you should get it from the journalist directly. All credit to Joe Scrabbles. There's even a video on the article if you prefer to get your information that way, which I guess you probably do. Club Nintendo, by the way, isn't the same as the Club Nintendo that exists now, where you get points and discounts and stuff like that. It was a bi-monthly magazine that was released in multiple languages in multiple European countries from 1989 through into the 90s. Think kind of like Nintendo Power. I'll link to a video about it from German Garage Games if you're interested to learn more. But back to Game & Watch. In West Germany and Austria, the Game & Watch was marketed by a company called Bienengräber, under the name Trickotronic. I'd love to be able to show you some real examples, but this channel is going to have to become a lot bigger before I have 300 plus euros to drop on Game & Watch. This picture is just from an eBay listing. My first Nintendo was a Donkey Kong Jr. Game & Watch, and I don't know what happened to it, but I wish I still had it. So we'll hear more about Bienengräber later. In France, they were called Video Poche, because France had language laws, and you couldn't just name a product Game & Watch, you had to call it something French. But Video Poche wasn't a brand name, there were multiple Video Poche from other companies, not just from Nintendo. JR21 was their distributor, which stands for, with apologies to France, Jeux et Images du XXIe siècle. Siècle? I don't know. I've got two languages, that's more than enough for a British person. Italy had two distributors, OTO and Giochi Pregiosi, and they called them Game & Watch. Flamagas, a cigarette lighter company, they distributed them in Spain. I found 3 UK distributors, Ocean Trading Limited. There's also CGL, or Computer Games Limited, and Contemporary Chess Computers, of course. At this point, I'd like to say a big thank you to the website gameandwatch.ch, that's linked in the description as well, and to various eBay sellers who included very detailed photos of the packaging. Good work. There are plenty of European countries I've not covered here, of course, but it's more distributors throughout Europe. Nintendo didn't have a coherent strategy for Europe back then. The companies found out about these Game & Watch things, ordered a bunch from Nintendo and put their stickers on them, and off they went to market. This is typical of almost everything Nintendo in Europe in the 1980s, right up until the NES. But I promise we're getting to that soon. First, we're going to do a little bit about the Versus system. The Nintendo Versus system was a family of arcade cabinets and conversion kits first released in 1984. It had similar hardware to the NES and, following their experience with Mario Bros., could easily run different games. These were designed mainly for two-player games, hence Versus, and some games used 2 monitors so that each player could have their own screen, making Versus Wrecking Crew the most fun version. And it's a great shame Nintendo hasn't re-released it. I recommend looking at its history in North America, and especially the website johnsarcade.com, which is a treasure trove of information about the machines from a very passionate collector. Far from being just a little arcade side project, the Versus system was a vital part of Nintendo's strategy to bring the NES to the USA following the American video game market crash of 1983, and it turned out to be much more successful there than in Japan. It was also a success in Europe in early 1986, particularly Versus Super Mario Bros., launching here before the NES just like in North America. But unlike North America, England was home to the first third party to develop games for it, Rare. Brothers Tim and Chris Stamper got their start developing games for the ZX Spectrum as Ultimate Play the Game, and were super successful. But as the Specky's popularity waned and piracy became rampant, they looked for their next system and found the Famicom. Nintendo wouldn't initially give them the technical specifications for it, so they reverse engineered it themselves, which impressed Nintendo of America enough to give them a development license for the Versus system. Their first game, developed under the name Rare Coin It, was Versus Slalom. The sprites have a cartoony ZX Spectrum quality to them. It's very smooth, nice 8-bit bum.
Feels like I'm wearing nothing at all. Nothing at all. Nothing at all. Stupid sexy Flanders!
Nintendo included with the Slalom Versus pack a set of pretend skis to control the game when they released it in 1986. Stellar Electronics, a German importer, brought Olympic skier Rosie Mittermeier to promote it at the 8th International Amusement Vending Trade Fair in Frankfurt, where she claimed it was more challenging than real skiing. To be fair, she was pretty good at skiing, having won 2 gold medals in the 1976 Winter Olympics. I'm quite fond of my copy of Slalom. It's the first game developed outside Japan for a Famicom-based system, made by an English company, and it's the first game made by Rare as Rare. This is video game history, a must-buy for any fan of Rare who likes bums. And it's cheap because it's a bit rubbish. And your next question, if you're not from mainland Europe, is why the box looks like this. It's time to talk about how the NES came to Europe. And like everything else in this video, it's kind of messy. So the story of the NES in North America is well known. After the video game crash, Nintendo had to find a way to sneak video games into American homes. They called it an entertainment system and made it look like a VCR. Then, to make extra sure, they put a robot in the box so it would sell in toy shops. Even though the Versus system was successful in American arcades, stores were still unsure about carrying video games. R.O.B helped. Meanwhile, there was no home video game crash in Europe. We had Atari, and we had Sega, and we had home computers. And the video games market was thriving. Nintendo didn't need to adapt the Famicom in the same way that they had for the US. But there were some changes they made between the Famicom and the NES that turned out to be quite useful. They removed the microphone because karaoke wasn't as popular outside Japan. And they made the controllers detachable because of complaints about damaged Famicoms, which was correct. So while Nintendo didn't develop a console specifically from Europe, between the Famicom and the NES that they already had, the NES was just the right choice. So we ended up with this VCR-ass looking grey box to sit right next to our obviously a video games console Sega Master Systems.
Oh, isn't life dull?
What we need is a Sega. That's a games console. Plug me in and things will really liven up. You can get loads of Sega games like Outrun, Double Dragon, Shinobi,
Ghostbusters! And the graphics, well,
and you can buy extra bits like these.
3D.
Oh, you look
Weird.
Okay, do us a favour. Plug me into a Sega.
Now whack on the patches and I'll get back to sleep.
On a recent trip to Switzerland, I visited this shop called Retro Paradise. It's a big shop with 2 floors of retro games, classic Nintendo displays, games to play, merch, they do competitions. Great place. It is, however, in Switzerland and everything is priced as such, so be prepared to pay a bit. But it's a really nice shop and definitely worth a visit. What captivated me the most though on my first visit was a display filled with these small box NES games. So we look through here. This is the type of NES game I grew up with, right? Big and chunky, and you probably did too. So what are these then? Well, these are known in Germany as the Bienengräber games. Remember them from earlier? They distributed the Game & Watch in West Germany. And if you're looking for these outside Germany, you'd search simply for small box, which makes a lot more sense because Bienengräber didn't really have a great deal to do with these. I like the efficiency of these little boxes. There's exactly enough space to store a cartridge, with a little manual slipped down the side. Unlike the big boxes that we all know and love that have a little bit of polystyrene at the bottom to kind of lift it all up, to basically so the cartridge sits sort of here. The manuals are simple, black and white, single page affairs, just telling you how to play the game in German. The back of the box, however, was in English. This suggests Nintendo just localized the manuals. The ones I have were all printed in Japan, both the boxes and the manuals, and they used English on the back as a kind of universal language, I guess, and then they could just slip in whichever manual was necessary for the distributor that was receiving the game. And that's how they would standardize the boxes in the European PAL B region. So it seems odd then to use English given the UK was in PAL A. So, for the NES, Europe was split into 2 regions. The UK and Italy was referred to as PAL A, and the rest of Europe was PAL B. What's PAL? It's a television standard. Watch my Street Fighter 2 video if you want to learn more. But these territories were region locked, so you couldn't simply buy a game in France and walk it over the border and play it on your Italian NES. I remember every time I went to France as a kid, I used to love looking in the Jeux video shops in the giant hypermarkets. But it's a good job my parents never let me buy any NES games while I was on holiday, or I'd have been terribly disappointed. Let's just put our toys away again, because we're responsible that way. I really like how these used the Japanese box art for PAL B, whereas in PAL A, we got the American artwork, sort of the big chunky pixel style for the black box games, which, you know, that was nice. Back to Bienengräber. So the story you normally find online about Bienengräber & Co. is that it was founded by R.O.B in Hamburg in the 1980s. But I've done a bit of research and I don't think that's true. They bought a toy company called BB & Comfort in 1975 and renamed the company to B.Co., short for Bienengräber & Co. I printed out this record from the Hamburg official court. So let's project it. It's probably easier than waving this slip of paper, showing off I own a printer. Here's the record from the Hamburg official court showing their old name and their new name and financial contributions from their partnership with Bienengräber & Co. So Harold couldn't have founded his company in the 1980s, right? B.Co. is still an active toy company, and if you look on their website now and go to the history page, down at the bottom you'll see that they say they used to distribute Nintendo product. So what's going on there? I found another website that says Bienengräber & Co. became insolvent, but it doesn't say when. Looking further through these records from Hamburg, you've got Bienengräber & Co. being partners for B.Co. in 1977, but then in 1984 it changes, and Harold Bienengräber, the merchant, becomes a limited partner. I think that's when Bienengräber dissolved and B.Co. effectively took its place, which means that the Game & Watch was distributed by Bienengräber & Co., but the NES cartridges were actually distributed by B.Co. Game & Watches have Bienengräber & Co.'s name all over them, but B.Co. elected not to put their name anywhere on the NES boxes, so hence the confusion, and I'm glad I was able to clear it up. B.Co. imported products from Bandai, Gakkan, and of course Nintendo. Stadlbauer, meanwhile, distributed NES games just like these in Austria, and then in Switzerland, Waldmeier. Our old friend Bergsala in Sweden also distributed games like this. Hong Kong, India, and various other countries had the same boxes too, and they're very cool. It's just America and PAL A who missed out. And as I say, Japanese artwork of Mario having a lovely time rather than big pixelated Fire Mario falling to his death in the lava. The early ones, the smaller versions of the NES black box games, had this cool blue and black design with the designation European version printed on the bottom of each one. A few of the later small box releases were just the standard American artwork scaled down, like this copy of Super Mario Bros. 2. Mario Madness indeed. See, that's got a turnip. Madness. These later releases included full-colour manuals in the local language, even though the box itself was still in English. Mario's back, bigger and badder than ever before. With turnip. I don't know if it is for you, but it's kind of weird for me seeing boxes that I know and love as a kid, just in this size, like with the art sort of slightly cropped, you know? There were 40 of these small box games released in Europe, basically all of the first party Nintendo releases up until 1990, with the last one being this game, To the Earth. It's basically a light gun game, but hard. Mission 1, to Uranus. Oh, what? Oh, okay. Yeah, I see. You meant to shoot all of these? This is definitely the most intense visit to Uranus I've ever had. What happened? Rad Racer was an exception because there had to be enough room in the box for the included 3D glasses. 3D action. The 3D glasses that come with Rad Racer are actually pretty well designed. They've got little flaps on the side so you can put them over glasses and look awesome. Yeah, see? There's a lot of kids who played Nintendo had vision problems, like the hero of the NES Zelda advert.
It's the Legend of Zelda and it's really rad. Those creatures from Ganon are pretty bad. Octoroks, Tektites, Levers too. But with your help, our hero pulls through. Yeah.
And 3D. Oh wow. Yeah, this is incredible. This is like I'm actually playing Rad Racer on the Nintendo Entertainment System. Except I have a slight headache. Yeah, they should have made this for the Virtual Boy. Let's try it for a comparison. Without the 3D action. Oh, Oh, okay, this is great. This is like I'm actually playing Rad Racer for the Nintendo Entertainment System, except I don't have a headache. So other rare exceptions are the R.O.B games, Stack Up and Gyromite, Baseball, and 10-Yard Fight. All games designed for the US market. Isn't that interesting? Num num num, foreshadowing. Actually, PAL B didn't get 10-Yard Fight at all, and R.O.B was exclusive to France. Even Scandinavia didn't get the Deluxe set, the set that included R.O.B the robot, Nintendo's robotic operating buddy. PAL B just got the NES with 2 controllers and sometimes, but not always, a game. Usually the game was Super Mario Brothers, but sometimes it was Ice Climber. Pour one out for the Ice Climber kids. Baseball also came out in Spain. I don't know. PAL A originally got the control deck and the Deluxe set. The action set, which I have, that includes the Zapper and Duck Hunt, came out a little later. But while France got R.O.B, they never got small boxes. They just had all the US boxes for the most part. I think that's a fair trade. Worst box art, but you get a cool robot.
Nous avons doté le Nintendo Entertainment System du premier robot vidéo interactif, du premier pistolet photosensible et de la gamme la plus vaste de jeux populaires. Le résultat, le numéro 1 mondial du jeu vidéo présente le Nintendo Entertainment System, le vrai jeu de puissance.
I think it's a real shame that Nintendo stopped doing these and that the PAL A region and the US never got them. I don't remember ever seeing these before I moved to Germany and was seeking out old NES games. Fun side fact though, this whole video exists because I thought these small boxes were cute and I wanted to tell you about them, and in doing so, justify buying more. Then I kind of fell down a rabbit hole and now this video is like 2 hours long. Nintendo would later re-release a few of these black box games, and for some reason Super Mario Bros. 3, as the Classic series, at a reduced price in 1992 and 93. I guess for those Nintendo fans who hadn't yet upgraded to the newly released SNES. There's a full list of the Classic series up there. I wanted to mention this because while I'm talking about the NES in Europe, I wanted to talk about, I've lost it, I wanted to talk about this game, a Mario game exclusive to Germany and Italy. This is Classic Series Mario Brothers. Let's do a little unboxing here of the 2 different versions. First look into the old one. I do enjoy the old style art for Mario Brothers, the original Japanese art. It's very pretty. Basically, you get a box and a game and a sleeve and a manual. You'll need lightning fast reactions to get out of this pipeline adventure alive. And although the box is in English, the manual, of course, is in German. Anleitung. Descriptions there of the Spielfiguren. And that's it. That's your lot. That's what you get with small box Mario Brothers. Mario Brothers Classic. That box is now in German. Der Klassiker der Jump'n'Run-Spiele ist wieder da. And I gotta say, this art is also cool. It's a lot more modern, of course, but you know, tells you what the game's about. Nintendo these days was packaging a lot more stuff with their games than they did in the old days. Let's first check out the instructions. We've got the Spielanleitung. Nice little graphics. Again, modern Mario graphics as opposed to what you'd normally associate with Mario Brothers. And then we get advertising. One side telling us all about the Nintendo Game Boy and the NES. Der Megaspiel Spaß für zu Hause. Good games there. Mario Brothers 3, of course. Tales and Rescue Rangers, quality third-party titles. And on the other side, because it was already available, Die neue Dimension der Action-Welt von Nintendo. Super Spielerpower. Modernste Super 16-Bit Technologie für sensationalen Spielspaß zu Hause. Super Tennis, F-Zero, Super R-Type, Super Soccer, Link to the Past, and Pilot Wings. This is the bit that everyone loves to read as the precautions and health notices. Before playing with your NES, Super Nintendo or Game Boy, read this. Yeah, we definitely did that. And then, Club Nintendo. This is what you used to get in games at the time in Europe. All you had to do was fill in your details on the back of this card, and that's how you joined Club Nintendo and got a free magazine for it. Pretty cool. So you get a lot more goodies in the more recent Mario Brothers. But the really unique thing is that this version of Mario Brothers restores content cut from the arcade original when it was ported to the NES, and, perhaps strangest of all, has improved air control. I think we should try these games out. We're going to need a sofa. Hello, I'm Bill. Welcome to the Retro Sofa. This is Claudia.
Hello.
Hello. Have you played Mario Brothers before?
I don't remember if I had. I definitely don't remember the weird eye crab.
Is this autofocus?
Yeah, but it's focusing on my face.
So this is the original Mario Brothers for the NES European version. So this is basically
No, I've
the
not
game.
played this.
Okay.
You can't jump on the enemies.
You can't jump on them. You've got to boop them from underneath
am I
like
actually
that.
doing
No,
anything?
no, not yet. You boop them from underneath, and then when they're upside down, you can kick them. Now we're actually playing.
What does the power button do?
Well, it hits every enemy that's on the screen.
Oh, I can't jump in. I can't move in the air either.
No, you've got no air movement in this.
Wait. So how do I actually jump on anything?
You don't jump on things. We've discussed this.
No, on like the platform.
You have to be moving when you jump.
Oh, I see. Did you die? Did I die?
No, we did the first
okay.
first phase. Jumping's awkward, huh?
I hate this. Oh,
he's
wow,
fast,
that's
boy.
a mega crab.
Yeah, he's annoyed because we killed all his friends.
It's okay. I mean, I guess it's... Where am I? Oh, I'm dead. Am I game over?
Luigi game over, yeah.
That's tragic. What's the story?
Mario and Luigi are plumbers in New York, I think. New York.
I'm sorry,
sewers
but
are
those
full of
crabs
turtles.
aren't doing anything. Like, the turtles aren't doing anything. I don't know why they're going down the pipes to murder all this wildlife.
I don't know how much wildlife you want in your pipes.
Well, I don't think I want, like, 2 small Italian humans down there either. Kampffliege.
Yeah.
What, like assault flies? So we've got Schildkrötekrebs, Kampffliege, Feuerkugel, Eiser, and Münze, obviously. Yeah, this was awful. I don't know why this became a success.
This was the first game to feature Luigi.
Yeah, he's not cool enough to carry this.
That's why it was a success.
Yeah.
Not super impressed with Mario Brothers.
No,
so far.
I don't think you were expecting me to be.
No, put that down over there because now we're going to play Mario Brothers.
Are these all things you bought?
Der Klassiker, der Jump-and-Run-Spieler ist wieder da.
Right, no one asked
Okay,
for
so
this.
look on the back. So have a look down the back of this using your better language skills than I've got.
All right.
And tell me if that says anything about this game being updated.
No, nothing.
No.
It just says, what a wonderful return. Mario and Luigi are back in their first pipe adventure. Just when you thought you can manage, they, as in the enemies, make your plumber existence hell. Which also, I should say, implies that the objective of this game is to fix some pipes rather than just murder every living creature.
See, it says on there, copyright 1993 now.
Yeah.
So this is a 1993.
Yeah, it's clearly like a remake then. Can you jump on the enemies in this one?
No, you still can't jump on the enemies. But look, you see the graphics are already updated a little bit, I think? I don't know. Anyway, 2-player game A, right?
Yeah.
We get a little intro.
Okay. This is more exciting to you than it is to me.
I don't have to... one hit flips it over. I don't have to tell you what to do.
Yeah. Kick off when upside down.
I often do.
Boom.
The big thing that you'll notice gameplay-wise
Gotcha.
is that you should have a little bit more... What?
Ah! Why have you done that?
Run away! Is that you should have a little bit more air control.
Yes.
Which is really weird. So the arcade original had the...
Yeah, this is much easier to play because you can jump... Oops, sorry.
Yeah.
You can do directional jumping.
Yeah, you can change your direction mid-jump. Which is the big change for this, which the arcade never had. The arcade version always had that dodgy jumping. But in this version
this was really good.
Yeah, in this version they've added back the intros from the arcade. The intros are from the arcade.
Oh, I see.
But the jumping is new. And this tells you how to defeat the sidestepper. And also what the names are.
Yes. I have to admit, this is significantly more fun than the first one.
Immediately, right?
Yeah. Just the jumping makes such a... Oh, no, I forgot.
And that's really the only mechanical difference is the jumping. Watch out.
Oh, no. Ah! Ah! Oh, no, that came out of nowhere.
Oh, and the fireballs are bigger as well, aren't they?
Fireballs?
Fighter fly, so...
So
it's like Kampf...
Yeah, Kampffliege. That is the direct translation.
Yeah. But how weird is it that they made the game much better?
Yeah,
and the box says nothing.
Okay, I feel like I feel like it's not enough to sell it as like a remake, you know? It's not enough changes.
No, but they could have put like Enhanced Edition or Plus or something like that, you know? See, anyone who's not familiar with this, watching me jumping here, is like, that's got to be a hack. It's not. It's an official version made by Nintendo just for the German and Italian markets.
Yeah, so wait, so America didn't get this?
No, UK didn't get this.
So who made these changes?
Like, Nintendo made this, but that's why there's so many questions about this version. Nintendo made this, released it only in Germany and Italy, and gave no indication.
Oh no, I forget these get angry. A
bunch of things happened there that were not intended. It's very cool that this exists, and that there's a like definitive version of Mario Brothers for home consoles that's even improved over the arcade version. Just from a capitalism point of view, why did they make this?
I mean, someone must have done some market research and thought, oh, America's not interested in that. Maybe.
Yeah, and the UK. Like, specifically.
Okay, but I get the feeling that the UK was kind of just, like, neglected anyway. Oh no, I died from a green...
Yeah, see, these enemies, that thing that just killed me, that everyone saw but you didn't.
Yep.
They weren't in the original NES release. You're fine.
I was pursued.
Watch out.
This has turned very slapstick very quickly.
Okay, get it. Yeah, we did it. Okay. Like, it's legitimately a fun little arcade game, and
yeah, sure. If I was a child in 1983 and so very bored.
Yeah, you would be in 1983.
Probably, I don't know.
Oh, watch out.
Okay. You know what? This was a hero's death.
Sure it was. Everything kind of ganged up on you at the end.
Yes. Yeah, because that was fire and ice and crab.
The three elements. He's really mad that this exists, and I don't understand why, but I appreciate it. Anyway, that's that. Go and check out Claudia at Spinster's Library.
And you like classic literature as well, like classic video games, then you might enjoy it.
Yeah. Classic literature. Some people who like classic games like classic literature.
Sure, I don't know any, but...
They must be out there. There was no reason for them to make this. They could have just re-released Mario Brothers with no updates and it would have sold just as many. Hey, I'm not complaining, it's very cool that it exists, I just don't understand why it does. Or why they didn't put anywhere on the box. New updated version, or deluxe, or better jump control, or non-flickery sprites, or anything at all. Nothing on the front, nothing on the back. There's no way of knowing this is a better version of Mario Brothers until you take it home, plug it in your NES, turn it on and go, ooh, icicles. This seems to be based on the Japanese Famicom Disk System game Kaita Mario Brothers, or Return of Mario Brothers, released in 1988 as part of a promotion with Japanese food company Nagatinian. They made a bunch of Mario-themed food products, and Nintendo made this game and put adverts for the food in it. The footage you're seeing is with the English translation patch by FC and Chill. That answers a little bit of the how, but still not the why. Maybe the development team saw the opportunity to create the definitive NES port of Mario Brothers when they were doing this cross-promotion and they just ran with it. Because they originally made it for a cartridge, and Famicom cartridges, before they came up with Mappa chips, had very low amounts of storage, so they might have had to cut down the arcade Mario Brothers to fit. So then they go, hey, we're putting this on a Famicom disk system, we've got this cool cross-promotion opportunity to re-release Mario Brothers, let's make it a really good version, right? Who knows? But that was at least marketed as being different from the original. Kaita Mario Brothers, Return of Mario Brothers, right? Makes sense. So then why do this? With no... Yeah, why do this, Minerva? With no extra thing on the box to say that it's a new version. Very weird. Weird thing to do, isn't it, Minerva? In capitalist terms, anyway. In terms of making the best game you can, they've done a fine job with this. It's really good. It's like... They put some work into this as well, you know? It's not just the Kaita version, they took out all the advertising. They added back in the arcade intros to all of the enemies. Yeah, you like those. Yeah, you like the flies, don't you? You like chasing the fighter flies. You know, and obviously just making it play at the right speed on 50Hz systems as well, because again, exclusive to Germany and Italy. And all the work they put in had no return just because there was no way of knowing that this was an updated version until you already paid for it. And every time Nintendo's re-released Mario Brothers since, on sort of virtual consoles and what have you, it's always been the old version, with the flickery sprites, the missing icicles, you know, the bad version. I mean, this is right here. I've got it. Re-release it. It's good. Anyway, if you want to know more about this and all the versions of Mario Brothers, check out the video by the Lonely Goomba linked in the description. It's really good. But it still doesn't answer my questions. Why, Nintendo? Why? And why did only Germany and Italy get to enjoy it? And perhaps also Austria and Switzerland, who are in the German region. Yeah, exclusive to the German region, not necessarily Germany. But still. Completely unique box design as well. You don't see this art anywhere else. This is completely new art for this release. You know, just a little plus. A little plus on the end there. Logo slightly smaller, little plus. Sell more. Just bizarre. I mean, the Classic series was a thing in Germany, France and the USA, with each getting different games, as shown in this chart here that I borrowed from Wikipedia. See what country is missing from that list? Italy. Yeah, even weirder, the Italian version. Even weirder that the Italians got this, because theirs doesn't have the Classic series logo on it, because Italy didn't get the Classic series. They just got Mario Brothers. And Classic series aside, European countries mostly got the same games as each other, but there were a lot of releases missing that the US got and we didn't, such as Dragon Quest and Final Fantasy. Remember my video about JRPGs and how Europe didn't get any? Well, it was true of the NES as well. At least we got Devil World. That's right, the Devil from Smash Bros. Brawl. America didn't get this game because Nintendo of America didn't like religious icons in games. I don't really know how blasphemous it is though, to be honest. You're a cute little dragon who defeats the devil by collecting crosses and Bibles. Probably would have been quite appealing to a lot of Americans, no? Defeating the devil with crosses and Bibles. I'm emulating it here because it fetches upwards of €200 on the second-hand market for the loose cartridge. It's the reason I'll never own all of the European small box games. It's like my life was over before it started. Boxes with the black and white manuals worked very well for Europe, and in Switzerland, Waldmeier would take the European release of the game with the English box and the German manual, and they'd just slide in a locally printed and translated French manual to go alongside it. Waldmeier, of course, was the Swiss arm of the Austrian company Stadlbauer. And you may have heard of Stadlbauer because they've got quite a long history with Nintendo. They started, rather like Bergsala, by distributing the Game & Watch in Austria and Switzerland in 1979, and then carried on distributing the NES. More recently, Nintendo fans might know them for these little babies. Look at my little babies. They are my babies and I love them. These are the Nintendo Mini Classics. Not to be confused, one more. Blue one. Not to be confused with the Nintendo Classic Mini, because Nintendo is really good at naming stuff. If you look very closely, I'm going to try and show you into the camera, and then give up and just put it as a little picture up here. It says Stadlbauer right there on the back, you see? Because these were invented by Stadlbauer. They're Game & Watch games licensed from Nintendo and repackaged in this cute little Game Boy form factor. And I love my little babies. And a lot of other people love them too. Stadlbauer first released these in 1998, and by 2007 they'd sold 10 million of them. They haven't put any out since 2014, and they're not currently for general sale, but that was a good long chunk of time that Stadlbauer was keeping the Game & Watch dream alive before Nintendo would eventually come out with the Super Mario Bros. Game & Watch in 2020. The same company still has a relationship with Nintendo today. Sort of. Stadlbauer as a brand is no more. The company took over the slot car company Carrera in 1999 and now trades as Carrera Toys GmbH. And it makes sense. The Carrera slot cars were always popular in Europe and have become massively popular more recently, including with the release of the awesome Mario Kart slot cars. So there you go. More importantly for us though, Stadlbauer was how Nintendo got into Eastern Europe. Eventually anyway. Part of the impetus for Nintendo starting Nintendo of Europe when they did was the fall of the Iron Curtain, expanding the available market. While these countries were part of the communist bloc, any Nintendo hardware they got wasn't supplied either directly or indirectly by Nintendo. But they did have quite a lot of Famiclones, clones of the Japanese Famicom. The Dendy was massively popular in Russia and former Soviet countries. Meanwhile, Poland, the Czech Republic, Bosnia-Herzegovina, and the Federal Republic of Yugoslavia had the Pegasus. But it's not right to say that these countries in Eastern Europe exclusively had clones. Stadlbauer was the first company that had official rights from Nintendo to distribute into Eastern Europe, and their expansion into the former communist bloc would start in the 90s with Hungary in 1991. Like in Switzerland, they would use the standard European boxes with the English language on the back and print Hungarian manuals locally in Hungary and slot them in. In 1992, Stadlbauer worked with Laser Plus to distribute the NES in Slovenia. In 1993, they signed a deal with MPM, covering the Czech Republic and Slovakia. After Poland updated its copyright laws in 1994, Nintendo and Stadlbauer moved in, working with local distributor Entertainment Systems Poland. And this was the same year Nintendo products started going through local distributors in Greece, Romania, Croatia, and Serbia and Montenegro. Also, they moved into Russia and former Soviet countries. Strange to think now, but Nintendo accomplished this by working directly with Steepler, the company that was making the Dendy Famiclone. And there was a while there where people could buy official Nintendo Entertainment Systems with Dendy stickers on them. I thought that was pretty wild, but it's actually one of the less crazy things about this whole Dendy story. I really recommend Did You Know Gaming's video about it. And if you want to know more about Nintendo in Eastern Europe, much of this section was informed by Joshua Rogers' excellent PAX 2020 presentation. All of this is linked in the description, but stick with us for now because we're going to talk Nintendo versus Sega.
You're now watching the video guide that will answer all the questions you've ever had about games consoles. Questions like, which is the best console for you and your family? The Sega Master System, currently Britain's most successful console. It's got some great optional extras, like the 3D glasses. Another highly successful Japanese console is the Nintendo, a complete entertainment system, and R.O.B, the ultimate video partner. Now the Master System has a big brother, the Sega Mega Drive, and mega is the right word for it. It's a 16-bit, mega stylish, mega deluxe console with uniquely designed hand controllers.
In the search for the definitive computer simulator game, one name is clearly emerging. Conix Multi-System.
West Germany, like the vast majority of European countries, didn't get their own version of the NES. They had the same European NES that was originally released in Scandinavia. This was the first European NES to be released and was very successful. In fact, Sweden and Germany were the countries where Nintendo probably most decisively won the console war in Europe in the 80s. Let's take a look at the numbers. Belgium and the UK were, I would say, pretty decisive wins for Sega. In France, West Germany, and other countries, it was definitely Nintendo. We need to read these numbers with a little bit of nuance though. And the Mega Drive had a 2-year head start on the SNES. That means the NES had an extra 2 years on the market, where it was competing with the Mega Drive that, broadly speaking, superseded the Master System. Why broadly speaking? Well, because Nintendo and Sega both kept their 8-bit consoles on the market as budget alternatives to the new 16-bit hotness. Meaning from 1992 to 94, the European console wars were a 4-horse race between the SNES, the Mega Drive, the NES, and the Master System. And in the 2 years before that, the NES had to hold the line for Nintendo against both the Mega Drive and the Master System. And since we're studying just the 80s with sales numbers up to 1993, this means the NES's numbers are artificially inflated. So in Italy, where the numbers are pretty close, with the NES just pulling ahead, I reckon if we just had the 80s sales numbers, that'd be Sega country. Also, remember when you look beyond these consoles into video gaming as a whole, they were competing with the incredibly cheap and popular 8-bit microcomputers of the time. So if the numbers look a little bit on the low side, that's probably part of the reason why. Plus the Atari 2600 was still on the scene, with new games being released continually from 1978 to 1990. So Nintendo's success sort of varied across Europe in the 1980s. Nowhere was the NES the same runaway success that it was in North America. So, although Nintendo had all these distributors in the 80s, they were pretty much distributing all the same products. The initial console hardware bundles were dictated by Nintendo, and the small box games that we love so much were all over the PAL B region. In most European countries, the boxes said European version on the front, same as on the cartridge flap on the consoles, idea being that people would only put in compatible cartridges. But there were occasionally small variations. The Spanish NES and the corresponding Spanish games said Versión Española on the front, even though they were fully compatible with the European NES. Spain got the NES after Scandinavia and Germany. There was an advert in 1987 that erroneously showed the Asian version of the NES that was released in Malaysia and Singapore. And that's caused a little bit of confusion, but Spanish and Portuguese distributor Spaco has said that they only ever sold the Spanish version. So this was just what they had for the marketing photo.
Paco.
The final European NES PAL-B variant I want to talk to you about comes from France, and I actually have one of these. It doesn't say anything on the flap, it just says Nintendo Entertainment System, so you've just got to know that it's the European version for region lockout purposes. But the biggest difference is around the back. So starting in the side here, you'll see there's no composite connectors, and when we get to the back, there's no RF out, instead there's this RGB/audio output. Does anyone know why that is? Correct, you big nerd! It's because, despite being in the PAL-B region, France didn't use PAL, they used CCAM. It still ran at 50 Hz, but it had a different colour format to PAL, and you'd know this if you watched my Street Fighter 2 video. If Nintendo had just released a standard European NES in France without modifying it, then it wouldn't have been in colour on any of their TVs. But SCART had been compulsory on French TVs since 1980, so there was really no choice but to make it output RGB SCART. France loves SCART, and they're right, it's great. I've got here the SCART cable Nintendo made just for the French NES. Ooh, he's a long boy. Right, there we go, get to the end. This plug looks a little bit like multi-outs that Nintendo would later use for the SNES, but it's not. It's its own connector just for the French NES. So does this mean the French NES has higher quality output? Yeah, not really, no. Here's a comparison. Even though the French NES is putting out RGB, it's not actually a higher quality than the composite output from any other NES. Why is that? Well, let's open it up. By which I mean, let's look at pictures from someone else who's opened it up. I'm not breaking my NES for you. As discussed, Nintendo had to make their French NES output RGB. There was really no other option that made sense. But instead of altering the console to display RGB natively, which is possible, just very difficult and very expensive, they instead added this little adapter from Sony. This just converts composite to RGB, and it's not great. If you look closely, you'll see that there are these horizontal lines on the video from the French NES, and this is either standard on all of them, or at least very common, and it's caused by this Sony box putting out a chroma signal that doesn't quite match the frequency the NES uses. If you want to mod your NES to output RGB, be warned, it's still very difficult and expensive. And how Nintendo is it that they use a part to convert composite to RGB, and then put a completely proprietary connector on it? I'm in big trouble if I lose this, that's going to get very expensive. No, just carefully put this over here. Patrick Lavenant's company ASD, short for Audio Sound Distribution, first introduced the NES to France in October of 1987, but it didn't go well. It wasn't entirely their fault though. Their partner bank got into a little bit of bother and couldn't finance them anymore, so Patrick went to Bandai France to offer them the distribution rights. They made Patrick the head of their video games department, and then they did a successful NES distribution. No notes. Great work, Bandai. The reason France was the only country to get the deluxe set with R.O.B was down to Nintendo of Japan. They insisted ASD and Bandai sell it. Reason being, it was very successful in America, but no one in Japan wanted one, so they ended up overstocked on R.O.Bs in Japan. And they thought, hey, this works in America, let's send all of these to France. France is the same thing. And it still doesn't explain why they got the American boxes either, despite being in the PAL-B region. They also got this very familiar looking advert.
Nintendo, la nouvelle intelligence des jeux vidéo. Avec R.O.B, le robot surdoué, vous êtes le maître de vos aventures. Des aventures dont vous êtes le héros. Des scénarios passionnants et pleins d'humour. Des heures et des heures de jeu, et pour la première fois au monde, des cassettes à mémoire qui enregistrent vos résultats. Nintendo, plus c'est intelligent, plus c'est amusant.
I'd love to have been able to read Florent Gorge's book, L'Histoire de Nintendo Volume 3, but I could only find it in paperback and in French and for €70, and I don't have €70 or French. It's coming out soon in English though, and I plan to read it, and maybe then I'll understand why Nintendo of Japan decided to fob all their R.O.Bs off on France, and why they ended up with the bigger American boxes. I don't know. or just generally fresh out my understanding of whatever happened to ASD. But there's a link to his YouTube channel in the description where you can find a little bit more about Nintendo in France and buy his book when it comes out. It's no surprise really that the NES flew off the shelves in France once Bandai got the distribution rights. Anime, manga and all things Japanese have been super popular in France since the 1970s. Even now, if you want to make friends with French President Emmanuel Macron, just get him talking about One Piece. This meant, of course, that Bandai already had a strong presence in France selling toys based on Japanese anime and manga series. They knew the French market well and were experienced with shipping and distributing Japanese products. They also got an exclusive NES game called Le Chevalier du Zodiac La Legende d'Or. That was made by Bandai based on the Saint Seiya manga. And they were the only country outside Japan to get the Dragon Ball NES game, also made by Bandai. Want to see the weird French Mega Man 2 advert where they just take this box art and just run with it? Okay. I'm gonna go in the garden and have a beer with my NES.
Megaman est de retour.
Le journal du monde Nintendo avec Mario.
Megaman est plus méga que jamais. Il souffle Airman. Il refroidit complètement Hitman et envoie Metalman à la casse. Dr. Wily, est-ce que ça bouleverse vos plans de conquête de l'univers?
Ah non, vous oubliez mes super robots, mes poules atomiques et toutes mes autres créatures.
Dr. Wily, merci, mais le mot de la fin sera pour Megaman 2. Nintendo.
In Japan in 1987, Hiroshi Yamauchi was the head of one of the most successful Japanese companies in history, but grew increasingly concerned about the impact of lawsuits on his American subsidiary. He wanted Nintendo to be a global brand, like Sony, so that these political irregularities, as he saw them, in individual countries wouldn't drastically impact the operation as a whole. It's for this reason that he wanted to make a concerted push into Europe and had put Shinichi Todori in charge of the European expansion. At the time, many Japanese companies were seeing the growth of the European common market and the coming fall of the Iron Curtain as invitations to expand their European operations, and Nintendo was no exception. Although European countries were a lot more separate politically and economically than they are nowadays, this was the right time to lay the groundwork for the establishment of a single business entity to oversee operations across the continent, even though the marketing approach within each country would still have to be different. But they weren't there yet. Each country had their own distributors and all of them coordinated with Todori. American company Mattel was already experienced in the video games market after launching its own Intellivision console in North America in 1980, going toe-to-toe with Atari's VCS, or 2600, until the 1983 market crash nearly bankrupted them both. Mattel sold its electronics division in 1984 and would stay out of video games until 1987 when it began distributing the NES in Australia and New Zealand. Later that same year, they agreed with Todori that they would join the push into Europe by distributing to the UK and into Italy via their distributor Wonderland. This is ultimately the reason for the two PAL regions A and B. Australia and New Zealand aren't in Europe, but they are part of the NES's PAL A region. When the Mattel version of the NES came out in the UK, the hardware was pretty much exactly the same. Same lockout chip. The only real difference was the removal of the channel selector switch on the back. See that? It's not there. Just a gap in the plastic, because connected devices in the UK, such as VCRs, always used channel 36. That's one of the few facts I could remember from my childhood for this video. I tuned so many TVs to channel 36. But because the channel was so high, there was no chance of collision with analog TV broadcasts, so I didn't need a switch. I remember wondering why my NES had this little hole here, and 3 decades later, now I know. Mattel had done well with the NES in Australia and New Zealand, but Mattel UK simply didn't know what to do with it, and just marketed it like it was a toy, expecting quick, short-term profit. Selling a games console was a different matter entirely, requiring a longer-term investment and strategy. The Mattel version, as it says on the cartridge flap, would not be the success Nintendo was looking for. Sega had beaten them to market with their Master System, and their marketing game was much stronger than Mattel's. For a start, it was in electronic shops and toy shops and generally places where you'd expect to find a video game system. Mattel tried to sell the NES in Boots. That's Boots. It's a chemist. Would you like a Nintendo with your cough syrup?
Someone will help care for your little ones. Help little chests fight big coughs. And you'll find there's a pharmacist to help and advise you. Boots. Someone cares.
To be fair, Boots always sold a few electronics products such as cameras and electric shavers, but it wasn't the natural place you'd expect to find the hottest new games console. They sold a selection of TVs and VCRs and also the Mega Drive in the 80s and early 90s in their Christmas catalogue, but it didn't really fit with the rest of their retail strategy. Certainly the public never saw it as a place for electronics or games, and I don't know why they took a punt on the Mattel NES. Oh, to be a fly on the wall at that board meeting. I presume they had the idea that they could compete with British king of the catalogue, blog, Argos. There are barely any videos about Mattel selling the NES in boots because Mattel sold the NES in boots.
Are you ready? Is your family ready for the incredible Nintendo Entertainment System? Are you ready for R.O.B, the extraordinary video robot? He follows the commands you put on the screen to help you tackle even the toughest challenge. Are you ready to shoot with the incredibly accurate zapper and play games like Duck Hunt or Mike Tyson's Punch-Out and The Legend of Zelda? The Nintendo Entertainment System. It's waiting for you at Boots now.
And while I'm on this, fellow British YouTubers, I love you, but if you're going to make a video about the NES, please make it about the NES. I didn't click on your video about the NES to hear you wax lyrical about how much you loved your Sega Master System. A small British company called Sans Serif, who at the time sold Trivial Pursuit after saying that video games were just a fad, took over the marketing and distribution of the NES in the UK in 1988. This makes the Mattel version of the NES particularly rare and valuable nowadays, even though we always saw it as inferior to the NES version. Yeah, that's really what we called it. A copy of Mega Man 2 here. It says, "This game pack may only be used with Mattel or NES versions of the Nintendo Entertainment System." And then there's this box here. Nintendo Entertainment System, Action Set, NES version. A caution, use only game pack cassettes of NES version or Mattel version, except game packs expressly manufactured for Mattel Canada. My British NES was this variant, and so were the ones of all of my school friends, except for one, who had the Mattel NES. Growing up, we always thought he had the slow NES. He didn't, of course. The internal components were all the same. The difference was his version of Super Mario Bros. As you know, PAL runs a little bit slower than NTSC, 50 Hz rather than 60. But Nintendo always optimised their games for PAL by just making everything a little bit faster, so the game would effectively run at the same speed. Usually, anyway. Mattel didn't do that with their version of Super Mario Bros. Here's an Australian advert with the really slow music.
We are Nintendo Ultimate TV Game System. We challenge all players. You cannot beat us. Aim your zapper gun. You cannot beat us. Even with your robot partner. You cannot beat us. Score 1 million. You cannot beat us. Discover new worlds. You cannot beat us. We are Nintendo. We challenge all players. You cannot beat us.
I feel like advertising isn't supposed to be bleak, you know? Anyway, the later non-Mattel release of Super Mario Bros. Was optimised for PAL, but they kind of messed up the music and it's way too fast. Hear that? The underground music didn't go doo-dum doo-dum doo-dum. It just went blum 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 like that. Whereas the Mattel release just seems to be exactly the same ROM as the NTSC version. So I'm going to make a little assumption here as to why PAL-A didn't get the small box games. Mattel, being an American company, coordinated with Nintendo of America rather than Nintendo Company Limited. That's why it's all Nintendo of America cover art right from the beginning, and also explains why the Mattel version of Super Mario Bros. Was basically just the NTSC version, with no optimization at all. But that's just me. I might be wrong. I don't really have anything to back this up. I just thought about it for a bit, and that's what I think happened. PAL-A wasn't entirely English speaking, but it was all overseen by Mattel, unlike PAL-B, where you had lots of individual distributors in different countries working directly with Nintendo Company Limited. Mattel's distribution might have worked in Australia and New Zealand, I don't know, but they definitely didn't get the right approach in the UK. And it wasn't just boots, they sort of messed up the packaging too. Because Mattel's European region covered the UK, Ireland and Italy, all the Mattel black box games released in the UK had 2 languages on the box, English and Italian. And a lot of English people just don't seem to like seeing or hearing other languages. And that would actually have hurt their sales, I think. I could do a whole video about linguistic prejudice in the UK, but this is a video games channel. Mike Hayes at sans serif would turn around Nintendo's fortunes in the UK in 1990, not simply by bundling Super Mario Bros. Running at the correct speed, but by not bundling it at all. Against the wishes of Nintendo of America, he bundled Konami's Teenage Mutant Hero Turtles in with the box, and sold it in shops other than Boots, although also in Boots.
Teenage Mutant Hero Turtles. Radical. Are only on the Nintendo console. Nintendo, the world's #1 game system.
Bold move to advertise the swimming level, but it worked. The NES finally overtook Sega's Master System in the UK. It was kind of weird for me growing up with it and then watching the video by the then angry Nintendo nerd just tearing this game apart, when it's the game that saved Nintendo in the UK and is probably the reason I'm a Nintendo nerd to this day. Just, you know, not the angry kind.
We can just walk over it? You can just walk over it. You are scum.
In fact, it's always been one of my favourite NES games, and this is the very copy I grew up playing. If you see past whatever sticker 10-year-old me stuck on it, you can see there's a little A there. That's for PAL A. That's where I lived. The UK turned out to be a very different market to the US. The proliferation of 8-bit microcomputers meant Nintendo was coming to a much more tech-savvy country where people were already gaming, unlike in the US following the market crash. The BBC, British Broadcasting Corporation, had released their own microcomputer, the BBC Micro, in cooperation with Alan Sugar's company Amstrad to encourage computer literacy and to get computers into more homes. The UK was also the birthplace of the ZX Spectrum, an incredibly cost-effective series of computers originally available in kit form that turned out to be very successful and would provide the starting point for many successful British games companies, including Rare. Piracy was also rampant, with people copying discs and tapes, and people in the UK were just used to paying much less for their games even when they did buy them. I think these differences will have taken Nintendo by surprise initially, and it took Mike Hayes, with a marketing strategy focused on the particulars of the British market and their love of the Turtles, to turn it around. So Mattel's distribution started in English-speaking countries, and at least in the UK, seemed to be coordinated by Mattel in America. I mean, who else would decide to sell the NES in Boots? But their region also included Italy, until toy manufacturer GIG took it over in 1991, because Nintendo of Europe didn't just take over all distribution all over Europe immediately on its founding in 1990. Still, Italy were kind of late to the party, getting their NES about 6 months after the UK and a full year after Scandinavia, 30th of October 1987. But it didn't start with Mattel directly, it started with Wonderland, a subsidiary of the American toy company Worlds of Wonder. Worlds of Wonder had partnered with Nintendo of America to help distribute the NES in the US. In 86 and 87, they used their clout with toy shops to get the NES onto the shelves by threatening to withdraw the rest of their toys from a shop if they didn't agree to stock the Nintendo. That's an oft-forgotten part of the story of Nintendo of America getting the NES into shops when shops didn't really trust video games. So Wonderland, as well as being a subsidiary of Worlds of Wonder, was also Mattel's distributor in Italy, so they got to distribute the Mattel version of the NES in Italy. Everything's connected. Wonderland's distribution didn't go super well, and Nintendo were probably poised to take it off them until Mattel bought out Wonderland in 1988, solving Nintendo's problem for them. Mattel had to put these little slips of paper in the remaining stock of NES consoles explaining that they would now handle the warranties instead of Wonderland. And then Mattel effectively ended up with the Italian market, after previously just going for the distribution rights for English-speaking countries. To try and turn things around, Mattel in Italy would put out these little kiosks in toy shops where people could try Nintendo games.
C'è ancora chi crede che I giochi di Nintendo siano come tutti gli altri. Svegliatevi e venite a provare la differenza in uno dei centri prova Nintendo riconoscibili da questa vetrofania. Capirete perché Nintendo è un videosistema e la febbre di Nintendo contagerà anche voi.
In 1990, they also had a go at a little celebrity partnership. They made some adverts with singer, songwriter and rapper Jiovanotti, who had hit the big time after his first album, Giovanotti for President, reached number 3 in the Italian album charts in 1988. And here he is shilling for Nintendo.
Oh, questo è proprio forte, poi l'ho invitata a casa e oggi mi viene a trovare. Sì, sì. Oh, è lei, ti richiamo, ciao.
Ciao.
Che sorpresa.
Disturbo?
No, è che sei matta, ero qua con Mario. Allora, vedi, quello lì è Mario Bros, che deve liberare una principessa che è nascosta dentro un castello. Per arrivare a questa principessa deve superare un sacco di ostacoli e deve fare un sacco di salti, no? Pronto? 130.000 punti! Oh, come hai detto che ti chiami?
La Nintendo mania dilaga.
Fatevi prendere!
There's that slow Mattel music again. But you can see this advert was definitely let's say a maturing of Nintendo's advertising approach in Italy. Take a look at this 1988 advert to compare.
E i giochi Nintendo sono incredibili! Così ricchi di mondi diversi e di vari gradi di difficoltà da sembrare sempre nuovi. Videosistema Nintendo!
Alas, their partnership was not particularly fruitful. Prices for the NES in Italy were simply too high, and Mattel would end up losing interest, choosing to focus more on their toys. So in 1992, the Italian market for Nintendo's little grey box started to turn a little bit grey too. Toy shops would import cheaper foreign consoles and unlicensed games and various adapters to play cartridges from other regions, and of course, the pirated multi-carts. That's when GIG took over distribution and would work with Nintendo of Germany to turn around Nintendo's fortunes in Italy to pave way for the release of the Super Nintendo. For more of the history of Nintendo in Italy and a look at a complete PAL-A ITA NES collection, check out Porro Michele's video in the description. Grazie mille, Porro. Okay, let's watch one more Italian advert, then we'll wrap up.
Ti piace la lotta? Il tuo Nintendo è Mega Man. E tu come Nintendi? Hai colpo d'occhio, metodo? Il tuo Nintendo è Tetris. E tu come Nintendi? Nasconditi un eroe? Il tuo Nintendo è Super Mario. E tu che hit Nintendi?
So for the NES in Europe, you had the UK, Ireland and Italy, I think coordinating with Nintendo of America effectively, while the rest of the continent spoke with Nintendo in Japan. Remember, the first distributor in Europe, Bergsala, got their start by lying to Nintendo of Japan about the size of their organisation and then segued their success with the Game & Watch into getting the distribution rights for the NES as well, directly from Nintendo Company Limited. They weren't speaking to Nintendo of America at all. Bico in Germany, ASD in France, Stadlbauer in Austria, Waldmeier in Switzerland, Spacco in Spain, same deal. The PAL-B region sprouted directly from Japan. That's the wrong box. Meanwhile, distribution in the UK, in Ireland and in Italy was being handled by American companies. That explains why PAL-A got R.O.B and PAL-B didn't, except in France. R.O.B only ever existed as an answer to the North American video game crash, so European countries never needed it. Those European countries being served by an American company got it anyway, and France. But this is probably the best explanation we're going to get for why Europe ended up being split into two regions, releasing products that were incompatible with one another. It all goes back to that conversation between Minoru Arakawa and Hiroshi Yamauchi about starting Nintendo of America on the condition that he was allowed a great deal of operational freedom because Yoko didn't want her husband to become like her father. Their relationship would improve later in life though. They ended up forging quite a good relationship when Hiroshi Yamauchi would go to visit Nintendo of America to see how it was getting on. You can read David Shuff's book Game Over if you want to know a little bit more about that, but I just wanted to tell you that it had a happy ending. And following the NES, the PAL-A and PAL-B regions would come together too. Because from their dealings with different distributors in different countries and how they would each in their own way make the NES a success, or not, Hiroshi Yamauchi and Shinichi Todori planned how they could take a more organised approach to Europe. It was clear that each country was different, so marketing would have to differ, but it could all be centrally coordinated. Nintendo had already insisted on most countries in Europe getting the same NES bundles and starting with basically the same library of games. So while Nintendo's expansion into Europe was initially kind of ad hoc, at least with the NES there was some kind of a firm strategy, even if it was predominantly informed, at least initially, by their experiences marketing in the US, which of course was quite different. So it made sense for Nintendo to start to coordinate more closely within Europe itself. Nintendo of Europe was established in 1990 to work directly with distributors of various countries, with different marketing agencies being used to market the products. Nintendo would later stop working with all of its distribution partners by opening Nintendo subsidiaries in all of their European markets, except in Scandinavia, where Ove Bergstrom's Bergsala still operates as Nintendo's first and last European distributor. Go to the website of Nintendo Sweden, Denmark, Norway or Finland, and right there at the bottom you'll see Bergsala. Nicely done, Ove. And when the Super Nintendo started arriving in Europe in 1992, there will be no more PAL-A and PAL-B. My German SNES games run on my British SNES, no problem. Bill, only you can... Okay. Only you can free the key from the claws of the beasts. Do it for us. Right. Yeah, I live in Germany and I have enough German to do my job and speak to my wife's family. I don't have enough German to hunt monsters. So I'm doing this to fill some gaps in my vocabulary should I ever have to hunt monsters in Germany. The story of Nintendo in Europe starts to get very boring after the founding of Nintendo of Europe. Nintendo has always been a huge, well-organised international company for as long as any of you or I can remember. And in Japan and America, at least after Donkey Kong, it was a very slick operation. But in Europe they had to find their feet, and it took them all of the 1980s to figure out how these countries were different to America, how they were different to one another, and what the similarities were so they could form a coherent strategy for the continent. Today, outside of Scandinavia, there are no remnants of this initial strategy remaining, and the history of Nintendo in Europe is nothing like as well documented as their history in Japan and America. That's what drew me to it, and being born in a PAL A country but now living in a PAL B country, and being able to do research in a couple of different languages, I thought it gave me a good perspective to be able to take a look at it. This has been a huge project for this channel, and it's the first that I can legitimately call a documentary. It was a lot of work, but I also really enjoyed uncovering this seldom told tale of Nintendo's first European adventures. I hope you found it interesting, and please like and subscribe if you did, so that I can buy more small box NES games. Oh, and if I missed out your country, or missed out something interesting about your country that you remember from your childhood, please tell me about it in the comments, and perhaps I can do a follow-up. Until then, go hug your loved ones, and thanks for joining me for an extended sit on the retro sofa.